They once believed that America was just a faraway land, full of chili peppers and illusions. But upon arriving there, the German prisoners understood why America could change the course of the war. Welcome to the untold stories of World War II. On June 4, 1943, on Ray Street in Mexia, Texas, unofficial Vercard's pencil trembled slightly as he jotted down notes in his secret diary that, if discovered, would land him in solitary confinement by his own officers. The Americans are definitely deceiving us. No country can sustain such wealth while fighting on two fronts. Through the train window, he had just witnessed images that were completely contrary to the 3 years of propaganda from the Nazi regime. Electric lights illuminated every house, street corner, and shop. A luminous dome of sky stretched across the Texas fields at 10 p.m. in Germany. Regulations concerning darkness have plunged the empire into darkness since 1940. Even before the war, only about 20% of farms in rural Germany had access to electricity. Yet here, in this country that propaganda portrays as decadent, electricity is supplied like water. 1850 veterans from Feiwin Raymer's army disembarked from the train. These aren't buildings used for loading or unloading goods, but rather PM buildings upholstered with amenities like dining options and beds. The entire population of Mahia gathered to witness their arrival. None of them knew that this moment would trigger the most profound psychological transformation in modern history, shattering German fascist ideology through the display of American industrial capabilities. The calculations of Allied victory were not written in the battle plans, but in the production figures that would soon shatter any assumptions these soldiers had about the enemy, their homeland, and their ideals. The collapse began on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General June Fonana, Ramber's successor, surrendered along with approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The figures may change as decontamination units continue to surrender over the following days. The West's most seasoned warriors, those who had repelled the British back to Egypt and who had once been respected by Montgomery, suddenly became prisoners. Among them was Headman Friedrich Radka, a first-class Suicide Cross veteran who had been wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, will provide investigators with the most detailed insight yet into the psychological impact of American captivity on German soldiers. The journey from failure to discovery began at the port of Oran, Algeria. As Raska and 30,000 other prisoners awaited transport ships in makeshift camps, the efficiency of the American military gradually changed their preconceived notions. The U.S. Army handles thousands of soldiers every day with organizational precision far superior to anything the VMX ever achieved at its peak. Identity cards were photographed and archived, medical checks were performed, vaccinations were administered, and the Geneva Convention's rights were explained in perfect German by American officers specially trained for this moment. The first shock came when we received the food. Operator Hans Meyer, who was captured along with the 21st Armored Division, wrote to his mother after 8 months. In the Oran prison camp, while waiting for the ship, the American soldiers gave us food that was better than anything we had ever eaten during the 6 months of fighting in the desert. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was just propaganda, that they were trying to impress us. We didn't realize this was their standard military ration. The Liberty ships that carried us across the Atlantic were truly monuments to American industrial prowess. The SS Robert E. Pyrie was built in 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes at the Kaiser Shipyard in Richmond, California. This would be considered baseless propaganda if the Germans knew about it. These ships, produced at a rate of 3 per day during peak production periods, returned after delivering supplies to the European battlefield. Instead of returning empty-handed, they brought tens of thousands of prisoners each month during the summer of 1943. The 2-week transatlantic crossing in July 1943 continued to have a profound psychological impact. Felk Zimmerman of the 90th Light Division kept a detailed diary, part of which survived through letters sent to his family after his return. He noted that the sailors on the ship were throwing away more leftover food each day than his entire company had received in the final months in Africa. The American pirates threw away half-eaten steaks, intact loaves of bread, and liters of stale milk. They do this openly without a second thought. It's not meant to mock us, but rather because to them, this waste is meaningless. Their supply is unlimited. The ships also became floating classrooms, showcasing American power. The prisoners knew that the ship carrying them was one of 2,710 Liberty ships that would be built during the war. Each aircraft requires 250,000 components, assembled from parts manufactured at 32 different production lines. Their motivations were, as they learned from the conversations they had with the American guards, manufactured in 3 different factories. Each factory produces 900 horsepower cylinders. They were then assembled at ports that had virtually not existed just 2 years earlier. The great Wilhelm von Staub came from a noble family that had served in every German war since the time of Frederick the Great. He would later write in his memoirs, "As our ship approached the American coast, I watched the rotating radar antenna on the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we and perhaps our brothers possessed in limited quantities, had become standard equipment on a cargo ship. That was when I began to doubt that Germany had lost the war." On August 2, 1943, at North Naval Base, Virginia, the first American spectacle shattered what remained of the propaganda about America's industrial weakness. North Base stretched across 4,300 acres, its docks stretching for miles with cranes unloading dozens of ships at a time. In one day, this port handled more cargo than all of Germany's hamburger ports in a week. G.D. Jan Weber, a factory worker before enlistment, counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of unloading. In his diary, in secret, he noted that each crane lifted loads that previously required a dozen men and horses in Germany. They operated electrically, smoothly, and continuously, without emitting coal smoke that suffocated our industrial cities. The workers were lined up to move to the waiting ships. Along the way, they saw parking lots full of private cars, including hundreds belonging to dock workers. In Germany, owning a car was the privilege of the rich and party officials. The Volkswagen, promised to the German people since 1934, was just a propaganda dream, with fewer than 1,000 delivered to ordinary citizens. But here, ordinary workers could drive to work in their own cars. Even so, no one could prepare them for boarding the ships. Not cargo stacks, not 40 and 8 cars, 40 people, or 8 horses, but the trains carried German troops across Europe in fully equipped passenger quarters. Pullman-style quarters with comfortable seats that could be converted into 5 berths. Dining quarters with white tablecloths and silver tableware. Observation quarters with large windows offering panoramic views. Man Radko wrote, "We boarded the train as tourists, not prisoners." The American guards seemed equally embarrassed by the comfort. One officer apologized for the malfunctioning air conditioning in their quarters. Air conditioning in August. They had thought such luxuries were only found on Hitler's trains. The 3-day train journey from Norfolk to camps in Texas and Oklahoma would prove a more powerful shot than any military defeat to Nazi ideology. As the trains rolled through Virginia, the prisoners pressed their faces against the windows, witnessing an America that, according to what they had heard, could not possibly exist. Every small town was brightly lit. Martinsville, Denview, Greisboro. Communities that in Germany might have had only one electric streetlight now boast brightly lit shops, electronic signs, and houses with lights in many rooms. Trains pass factories operating night shifts, windows glowing, and parking lots crowded even at midnight. Journalist Obergmer, whose father was a Nazi Party district leader in Hamburg, wrote in a letter discovered in 1987 that they passed through dozens of cities on the first night. People here have more electricity than all of Hamburg. The guards told them it was normal that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. I called him a liar. He just shrugged and said they would see. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped to get water and ice. The prisoners watched as the American railroad workers finished in 30 minutes, a task that would have taken 2 in Germany. Hours. Automatic coal loading equipment, electric water pumps, and mechanized lubrication systems. Every aspect of this operation demonstrated technological superiority. What bothered them even more was the comfortable wealth of the workers themselves. They wore leather shoes worth 2 months' wages for a German worker. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and tossed empty bottles into the trash without a second thought. Henrik Muller, an electrical engineer who had been unemployed before the war, calculated that the station where they stopped alone consumed more electricity in an hour than his entire neighborhood in Berlin consumed in a day. The waste was magnificent, he wrote. They left lights on in empty buildings. Electric fans ran continuously in empty rooms. It was the superficiality of an inexhaustible resource. As the trains entered Tennessee and Kentucky, the monks witnessed the industrial power of America unfolding before their eyes. Through the windows, they saw factories so large they were overwhelming, many even bigger than all they had ever seen in Germany. The Ancoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched 3 miles along the river with electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kbit of electricity, more than the entire city of Music. Near Louisville, As the train slowed, they passed the Rubber Town complex, where synthetic rubber factories sprang up from barren fields in just 18 months. These four massive facilities each employed thousands of workers, producing up to 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. Meanwhile, even the country that first invented the process had never achieved more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Eric Hoffman, a chemist from E.G. Fab, immediately understood the implications of that. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I knew those factories. I could see the distillation columns and the catalytic cracker machines. Each facility is more modern than anything we've ever built, and this site alone has 4 of them." They said there were dozens more plants nationwide, and the train continued past Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit, visible in the distance. This factory was built in just 9 months. Produced one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At its peak, 42,000 workers assembled aircraft from 1,050,000 parts manufactured by 1,500 subcontractors. This plant occupies an area of 2.5 million square feet and consumes more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. Futman Verlet, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the window as the train passed by. He counted 17 B-24s at various stages of completion. We were told that the American aircraft were of poor quality, hastily built, and would be destroyed in combat. But I can see the precision of the assembly line and the quality in every detail. These are not inferior aircraft. They were simply manufactured faster than we could have imagined. The deeper one goes into America, the more the myths about Nazism are shattered. At Lays River, they crossed the Mississippi River on the S Bridge. Below, barges carried more grain than Germany had harvested in 1942. The monks could see towers of wheat stretching along both banks. Each tower holds enough rice to feed a German city for months. K. Smith, a farmer's son in Bavaria, wrote in his diary, "The Americans transported food like we transported ammunition in large quantities without worrying about loss. I saw them load a barge with enough grain to feed my whole village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with more meat than our ration for a whole week." In Kansas City, the train stopped at a large ranch where tens of thousands of cattle were being slaughtered. The smell of meat from the meat processing plants spread for miles. German soldiers who had lived on 200 grams of meat a week in fortunate conditions in Africa witnessed American workers eating beef sandwiches during their lunch break. "They ate meat like we ate bread." A man named Paul Fisher wrote this. "No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we longed for bread. The guard bought us hamburgers from a stall near the station. Meat, cheese, and vegetables between 2 layers of white bread only 15 centimeters wide. He didn't hesitate to buy 20 of them, paying with a dollar bill. This wasn't anything special. It was their normal food." When we arrived at the prison camp, we witnessed a dramatic change in perception. The camp in Texas, built in just 4 months, housed between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners in conditions far superior to what most of them had experienced as civilians. The wooden barracks had electric lights, enclosed toilets, hot showers, and steam heating. Each building was constructed with more wood than even villages in Germany. The camp hospital made a strong impression on the medical staff among the prisoners. Major Dr. Friedrich Bauer, head of the division's surgical department, burst. 164 realized they were in a facility better equipped than most civilian hospitals in Germany, with X-ray machines, surgical equipment, and medicines they hadn't had in Germany since 1941. All of these were standard prisoner of war supplies. They had penicillin. Dr. Bauer would later attest, it was the miracle drug we'd only heard about. They used it freely, even on prisoners with mild infections. Meanwhile, German soldiers were dying from a lack of basic sulfuric acid. The Americans, on the other hand, readily provided us with the most advanced medicines without hesitation. The camp kitchen became another classroom of American affluence. Those assigned to cook discovered large refrigerators, electric mixers, automatic dishwashers, and gas stoves capable of preparing meals for 5,000 people. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and bread. White noodles, something that ordinary people in Germany hadn't seen since 1939. Favorable Autocrafts, a hotel chef who once lived in Michigan, wrote, "Today we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. It's not spoiled food, it's simply leftover." American regulations required us to prepare 10% more than needed to ensure each prisoner received their full ration. Any excess would be thrown away. I cried as I threw the unopened loaves of bread into the trash can. By September 1943, The labor shortage in American agriculture had led to the use of prisoners of war in fields and factories nationwide. This decision stemmed from a need that proved to be more damaging to Nazi ideology than any propaganda program could achieve. Groups of prisoners were transported daily to work sites, traveling through rural America without blindfolds or restricted routes. They had seen everything: endless fields of corn and wheat, constantly operating factories, shops overflowing with goods, parking lots crammed with cars, and houses with refrigerators and radios. At a cotton mill outside Houston, Henri Herbert Lang witnessed a machine process more cotton in an hour than his entire village could produce in a month using traditional methods. This plant was supplied with electricity by the Colorado Electric Power Company, as part of a rural electrification program that brought electricity to 90% of farms in Texas by 1943. The farmer who owned this plant was none other than G.H.I. Chep, not an aristocrat, not a party member, just a farmer. But he has electricity, clean water, trucks, cars, and tractors. The workers, including black people, ate lunch from boxes containing more food than German workers received in an entire week. This is normal. Every farm we passed was like that. In Nebraska, prisoners working in the old sugar fields witnessed agricultural mechanization that was difficult to comprehend. They learned that a single combine harvester could do the work of 100 people. The fields stretched to the horizon, each one larger than entire districts in Germany. Farmers talk naturally about agricultural output, which in Germany would be considered nonsense. With 60 bushels of wheat per acre compared to 30 in Germany on the best land. G. Frieder Wilhelm Hoffmann, who worked on a farm near Scott Bluff, wrote, "The farmer's son, a 16-year-old boy, drives a tractor worth more than all my father has earned in his entire life. When I mention this, he laughs and says it's not a very good tractor. His father is waiting for a new model from John Deere that's even better." The most shocking revelations came from prisoners working near or in American factories. Although the rules of the Geneva Convention did not allow direct work in wartime production, prisoners could work in industries that freed up American labor for military production. This loophole allowed thousands of German prisoners to witness American industrial capabilities firsthand. At a sub-Cambo factory in New Jersey, prisoners watching the production line processed more tomatoes in a day than many factories processed in a month. The factory operated with a very large workforce. Few people were there, mostly women and the elderly. Most of the young men had joined the army. However, production still exceeded peacetime levels. Stfel Webb-Wagner, who had worked in a food processing plant in Germany before the war, recorded this experience. Everything was automated by power transmission, automatic filling machines, and autoclaves processing hundreds of boxes at a time. An elderly woman monitored the control panels that in Germany would have required 50 workers. She worked while listening to the radio and drinking coffee. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant got a glimpse of the automotive industry's shift to military production. The River Rouge complex, visible from across the water, employed 100,000 workers producing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. The plant consumed 1.5 million kui a day, more than the entire city of Hamburg. We could see parking lots, as operator Franzner wrote, filled with thousands of vehicles belonging to the plant. The workers' possessions. In Germany, even our officers rarely own cars. Here, factory workers drive to work. The guard said many workers own 2 cars, one for work, one for family use. We thought he was mocking us. By the winter of 1943, the cumulative effect of these observations had created what American intelligence officers called an ideological collapse syndrome among the prisoners. The Special Project Unit, a secret educational program run by the General's Office, noted an increasing number of prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. In December 1943, Captain Paul Noland, a member of the observation team, reported that the prisoners no longer argued when presented with production figures. They had been through too much already. The followers, the most fervent fascists, were now silent. They remained loyal to Germany, but no longer spoke of victory. Many openly questioned what they had been told about America. Prison newspapers, produced by the prisoners themselves, gradually reflected this shift. The Deer Roof, published at Fort Kyrgyz Island, gradually moved from defiant nationalism to discussions of democracy, the economic system, and post-war reconstruction. Editors were carefully selected from anti-fascist prisoners. Noticing their increasingly receptive readers, Lieutenant Herman Godz, captured with the 10th Tank Brigade, wrote a letter that was reviewed by American censors. "We were told that America was a mixed, weak, divided, Jewish-controlled, militarily incapable nation. Every day I'm here, I see the opposite. This is the best organized, unified, and strongest country in the world. We were told fairy tales by the criminals. The biggest shock to Nagi's thinking came from an unexpected source: the treatment of Italian prisoners after Italy's surrender in September 1943. Italian prisoners who agreed to cooperate were formed into service units, given better accommodations, higher wages, and more freedom. German prisoners watched their former allies work alongside the Americans, ate in American restaurants, and some even dated American women. Friedrich SS wrote, "The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better. We used to treat them as allies. They work freelance, earn money, and send goods home. Americans did not show any animosity towards them. The democracy we are taught to be desp is disgusting. It turns out he's even more respectable than our system." Christmas in 1943 had a profound psychological impact. American organizations, churches, and community groups have sent 500,000 Christmas gift packages to German orphanages. The enemy had attempted to kill American soldiers just months earlier. Each gift package included cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities invited prisoners to Christmas dinners despite regulations preventing the majority from doing so. At the HN Texas camp, the choir of the local Methodist church sang Christmas carols in German for the prisoners. Women from Hearn sent homemade cookies and cakes. The Boy Scouts distributed handmade Christmas cards. This kindness is for the enemy who shattered the last remaining remnants of Nagi's racist theory. Bolton Walter Mahler, whose brother died in the Ham air raid, wrote, "They knew we were their enemies. Many had sons and husbands fighting against our army, yet they still showed us compassion. Not propaganda, but genuine kindness. Who treats the enemy this way? Only those completely confident of victory and firmly in their power." The Christmas feast itself was beyond comprehension. Turkey, steak, mashed potatoes with gravy, rich tubers, cakes, ice cream. This was an amount of food Germany hadn't seen since before World War I. The prisoners ate until they were full. It's incomprehensible why such resources were given to the enemy. "We ate like kings." Vibo Hansa wrote, "Better than the German generals, better than the party leaders." And this wasn't unusual. The guards told us, "I thought this was a normal American Christmas dinner, that every American family was having the same meal. If they could feed prisoners like this, then surely their soldiers must be eating something similar." By early 1944, over 40,000 German prisoners had participated in educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and science. The University of Chicago offered distance learning courses. Stanford University sent professors to teach democracy and economics. Their thirst for knowledge was insatiable. The prisoners, previously considered Americans to be mere cultural barbarians, discovered libraries with millions of books. Universities welcomed all social classes, and scientific research led the world. They were free to read American newspapers, comparing different viewpoints, something impossible in Nazi Germany. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, participated in the sessions. He lectured on nuclear physics at Camp Shelby. He wrote, "The American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They talk about science as something belonging to China and to all of humanity. They were much faster than the German research, and they shared their knowledge with their enemies. This spirit of generosity is something that souls shaped by Nazi ideology cannot comprehend." The movie theater card in the camp showed American films, not propaganda, but ordinary Hollywood productions. The prisoners watched The Angry Grapes, sensing an image of American failure and resurgence that they saw parallel in their own situation. They were surprised to see Americans dare to criticize themselves in front of their enemies. They didn't hide anything. In his writings, Jose Primer noted that they revealed their problems, failures, and conflicts. However, this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker. In Germany, such criticism would result in death. Here, that is considered patriotism. The spring of 1944 brought about expanded labor programs for prisoners as American production reached its peak. German workers in food processing plants, workshops, and manufacturing facilities witnessed the full power of American industrial capabilities. The numbers told a story that no propaganda could refute. At the Higgins shipyard in New Orleans, prisoners unloaded steel that would become the landing craft for the day of departure. They watched as workers assembled 700 boats each month, each requiring 20,000 components. The factory employed 20,000 workers, including thousands of women who operated cranes, welded ship hulls, and managed production lines. Stapsfell Wibble Kierman wrote, "Women did men's work. Black people operated complex machinery, Teenagers operated drilling equipment. All things that we had been told were impossible in a democracy. But production never stopped. 3 worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This factory produced more ships in a month than our Navy produced in a year. At the Republic Steel Plant in Ohio, prisoners witnessed the production of 10,000 tons of steel a day. The furnaces operated continuously, supplied by trains carrying iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. The scale of production here exceeded the imagination of the Germans. This plant alone produced more steel than the entire German Federation at its peak. A writer who had worked at CRUK before the war, Paul Hartman, wrote that he thought he understood industrial production, but this was beyond imagination. We were spending more steel than we could produce. Workers complained about the extra work while producing volumes we couldn't achieve, even with slave labor and double shifts. The 1944 harvest completely shattered German fascist propaganda about American weakness. German prisoners of war working in the Midwest witnessed agricultural production that could feed the world. In Kansas, they saw wheat fields where one farm produced more food than an entire German province. Harvesters moved across the fields like ships on a golden ocean, each harvesting 100 acres a day. The month's worth of grain they filled could hold more wheat than Germany imported in an entire year. A farmer from East Prussia wrote to an American farmer that with one machine, the work of an American farmer was equivalent to the labor of 100 German farmers. They showed me photographs from above, across the wheat fields, thousands of square kilometers of grain. They could lose half their harvest and still have more than all of Europe combined. In California's Central Valley, prisoners harvested fruit in sprawling orchards. They witnessed perfectly good fruit being discarded for a slight imperfection, something that would be considered valuable in Germany. Sometimes entire crops were plowed up to maintain prices, a concept that psychologically devastated prisoners from Germany, where it was worth mentioning. They destroyed food to keep prices stable. Writer Gerarder Ottos wrote, "Piles of oranges were buried by bulldozers because there were too many. We begged to be allowed to send it to our family in Germany. The guards were sympathetic but explained that it was impossible. This wastefulness is strategic evidence of unlimited resources." On June 6, 1944, when news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, German prisoners experienced their final ideological collapse. The scale of the operation, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 people in the first phase, proved that America's organizational capabilities far exceeded the imagination of the German composer. Prisoners at Shelby Camp watched footage of the invasion for several days. They saw endless lines of ships, artificial ports, and supply systems that transported 15,000 tons of goods daily across the vast beaches. They witnessed their homeland being devastated by the very nation they had been told was too weak to fight. Our Friedrich von Tben wrote, "We knew that everything had failed not only in the war, but in the entire project of Nazi Germany. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial ideology. We had used horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources." During their captivity, the German prisoners of war experienced an experience that challenged Nazi ideology even more. Whatever material wealth, it was American humanity. Although propaganda had portrayed Americans as weak and sentimental, the prisoners discovered a people strong enough to show compassion. When Johannes Muller's son died in the Hamburg bombing, the American camp commander personally delivered a Red Cross message and offered condolences. When Paul Fisher's wife wrote that she was struggling to feed her children, religious groups' American officers sent food packages to her in Germany, even as civilians in a country the U.S. was bombing were being separated from the German people from the fascist regime, as Mann wrote. They said they were fighting against Hitler, not the Germans. This distinction, which seemed like mere propaganda, proved to be true. They prepared us to rebuild Germany after the war, not to destroy it. Special medical treatment had a profound impact on the prisoners of war. German doctors worked alongside American medical personnel, learning new techniques and using advanced equipment. The prisoners underwent surgeries only available to the elite in Germany. Psychological treatment, almost unknown in WMEX, was provided to soldiers suffering from psychological trauma. Dr. Friedrich Bauer wrote, "They treated those with suicidal intentions through counseling, not punishment. Prisoners in mental crisis received therapy, not beatings." This humanity toward the enemy revealed a power we had never understood, the confidence of true power. By May 1945, the secret education program had achieved remarkable results. Over 25,000 prisoners of war had volunteered for courses on democracy. Camp newspapers published articles on constitutional government, free markets, and citizenship. Discussion groups debated the future of post-war Germany. The program's success far exceeded all expectations. The prisoners of war who had once appeared as fanatical fascists were now writing essays on democratic restructuring. Officers who had sworn allegiance to Hitler were planning the deployment of American agricultural methods in post-war Germany. We had become evangelists for democracy. Hermann Göring, unrelated to R. Marshall, admitted in a 1975 interview that this was not through coercion or propaganda, but through diplomacy. We saw this model work. We saw ordinary people living better than the German aristocracy. We wished that for Germany. Their transformation was so complete that American authorities worried that the prisoners would become too enthusiastic about the American way of life. Some applied to stay in America after the war. Others married American women they met through the prison letter exchange program. Eventually, thousands immigrated to America in the 1950s, April 1945, bringing a shocking truth when American forces liberated the concentration camps in Germany. Those images were shown to the Germans. Many refused to believe it at first, saying it was just propaganda, but the evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from American soldiers, photographs, videos, news, and finally letters from Germany confirming the horrors. The psychological impact of that information was a shock. A great deal. Those who had retained a semblance of German pride and honor, despite military defeat, now faced the complete moral collapse of their nation. All that they had fought for had not only been defeated, but had become evil. Hetman Watersmith wrote succinctly, "We thought we were warriors for a noble ideal. We discovered that we were instruments of crime. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. We realized that we were the barbarians. The Americans we called weak and degenerate showed us what true civilization meant." When the war ended in May 1945, the German prisoners faced returning home with mixed emotions. They had witnessed an America that contradicted everything they had believed in. They had eaten better in prison than they had as soldiers. They had been treated with more respect by the enemy than by the government. Their own. The final months in prison were dedicated to preparing for return to a devastated Germany. American authorities provided vocational training, agricultural education, and political instruction. The prisoners learned about the Marshall Plan before it was announced, understanding that America would rebuild, not punish, Germany. They prepared us to rebuild the country. Friedrich von Behn wrote, "They gave us skills, knowledge, and hope. They transformed defeated soldiers into future citizens." This generosity from the victors was difficult to comprehend for minds shaped by Nazi hatred. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German prisoners were repatriated from American prisons. They returned to a divided, shattered, and impoverished Germany. But they carried with them something precious, knowledge of how a democratic industrial society worked. The German prisoners experienced prosperity. The Americans became unwitting agents in Germany's post-war transformation. They had witnessed industrial efficiency, agricultural productivity, and democratic prosperity. They believed Reconstruction was possible because they had seen a society achieve it. Many former prisoners of war became prominent figures in West Germany's Reconstruction. Hans Kron, a prisoner at Camp Shelby, became West Germany's ambassador to the United States. Walter Stein, who had taught at Camp C, became president of the European Commission. Rudiger von Laue, imprisoned at Camp HN, served as Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations. Edward Ackermann, convict at Fort Robinson, became a leader in German agricultural reform. They brought American methods to German industry, the American spirit of efficiency to German agriculture, and American democratic ideals to German politics. The economic miracle of the 1950s was partly built on the lessons they learned. They learned in American prison camps. We learned that prosperity comes from freedom, not from conquest. Hans Skroll wrote in his memoirs, "They found that democracy creates wealth, diversity brings strength, and good treatment of workers increases productivity." These lessons shaped the new Germany. Historians have called the experience of German prisoners in America one of the most successful re-education programs in history. Without coercion or traditional propaganda, the industrial power and democracy of America transformed former fascists into future democratic citizens. This program succeeded not through words, but through practical observation. The prisoners saw American society function at maximum efficiency while treating its enemies with respect. They witnessed industrial capabilities that made German production seem rudimentary. They experienced a standard of living that exposed the promises of fascism as mere illusions. Dr. Arnold Kramer, a leading expert on German prisoners of war in America, concluded that the U.S. won the propaganda war not with clever messages, but with reality. Every full meal, every light bulb, every functioning toilet was an argument against urinating. The prisoners were transformed by prosperity. Statistics support this assessment. Of the 371,683 German prisoners of war held in the U.S., less than 1% attempted to escape, with a total of only 222 attempts. Post-war surveys showed that 95% felt they were treated well or excellently. Notably, thousands maintained contact with their American families for decades after the war. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the end of the war, surviving German prisoners of war held a reunion in Austin, Texas, with over 500 former prisoners returning to the U.S. Many brought their families to show them where they lived, the beginning of the transformation they underwent. Former prisoner of war Hans, who was imprisoned at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and later became a doctor in Georgetown, Maine, spoke at the reunion. Life in the camps brought about a great improvement for many of us who grew up in cold apartments in Germany. We experienced clean water, central furnaces, and abundant food. But more than that, we found our self-respect. Former officer Khmer, who worked on farms in Iowa, shared that the farmers didn't treat us like enemies, but like young men far from home. They shared their meals, their knowledge, even their homes with us. That's the humanity from people whose children are fighting against us. This has transformed us forever. At the 1985 reunion party, former priest Obst Hermann Gutz, then 78 years old, delivered a keynote speech highlighting the nature of this transformation. He said, "We came to America as enemies, Nazis and people who believed a lie. We left as friends, Democrats, people who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom. We witnessed the power of democracy in production. We saw farmers producing food for the whole world, workers building tools for victory, and citizens treating their enemies with dignity. We learned that America's real weapons are not bombs or tanks, but its boundless creativity and unwavering confidence. We returned to Germany with a mission to build a society that can create instead of destroy and prosper through peace instead of war. Newly resurrected from the Nazis, built on lessons from American prison camps, the conquerors, departed as students from the hands of former enemies. Now, friends, thank you, America, for showing us the way." The auditorium erupted in applause. Americans and Germans, former enemies, united in recognition of a transformation that once seemed impossible when the first ships landed in Texas in June 1943. The scale of the German serviceman's experience in America can be measured by striking numbers that show the scale of this operation and its incredible success. The prison system comprised over 500 camps on 45 banks, excluding Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. There were 175 main camps with 325 branch camps. These camps were built to hold between 250 and 12,000 prisoners each, and construction was completed in an average of 90 days per camp. The prisoner population was 371,683 Germans, out of a total of 425,871 prisoners from symmetrical countries. The population peaked in May 1945, with an average of 20,000 new arrivals per month in 1943, 30,000 per month after the arrival date, and 60,000 per month in the final months of the war. Labor contributions amounted to 14 million agricultural workdays, 100 million sets of processed timber, worth $230 million in labor at the time, with an average wage of 80 cents per day per prisoner. These prisoners filled the critical labor shortages in 46 camps. Regarding escape statistics, only 2,220 attempts were made to escape out of over 371,000 prisoners, equivalent to 0%, and none of the escapes were permanently successful. Most escapees were recaptured within 12 days, 24 hours. No American civilians were affected by the PS war prisoners when they escaped. In educational programs, over 40,000 people participated in courses. There were 135 newspapers distributed at the camps. 30,000 people learned English, 15,000 participated in vocational training, and 8,000 attended post-war education from universities. After the war, approximately 5,000 former prisoners of war emigrated to the United States. Over 12,000 maintained contact with American families, with an average contact period of up to 31 years. Many returned to the U.S. as tourists or business partners. Regarding treatment, 95% said they were treated well or excellently. 74% believed their time in captivity had positively changed their worldview, and 61% expressed a desire to learn about democracy. Less than 10% remained steadfast. Beliefs in fascism in 1945. German prisoners of war, experiencing the industrial power of America, not only witnessed history but were also transformed by it. Their time in captivity became an opportunity to learn, their failures became enlightenment, and their imprisonment became freedom from the ideological chains of fascism. Ultimately, America's greatest victory was not on the battlefield but in the prison camps, where clear evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what the military could not, a complete change in the enemy's thinking. When they arrived in America, they believed in Germany's superiority and America's weakness. But they left with the truth. America's industrial power was not only immense, but also beyond the comprehension of those who had lived in poverty and oppression. The ships that took them to captivity in 1943 carried soldiers of the Third Reich, while the ships that took them back to Germany in 1945 and 1946, following in the footsteps of the architects of democracy, they witnessed the future and saw that it worked. Their story testifies to a profound truth. The most powerful weapon in America's arsenal is not military might, but clear evidence of the potential for prosperity in a free society. The German prisoners of war were overwhelmed by American industrial might, but they were ultimately won over. Their transformation sowed the seeds of post-war Europe's salvation and the ultimate failure of the dream of prosperity. They returned to Germany not as losers, but as witnesses to what free societies can achieve. The economic miracle that transformed West Germany in the 1950s was built on foundations laid in American prison camps, where enemy soldiers learned that prosperity comes not from war, but from freedom. Not from racial superiority, but from dignity doesn't come from totalitarian control, but from democratic cooperation. German war veterans arrived in America expecting to find a weak, fragmented, and crumbling nation. Instead, they discovered an industrial giant with boundless power and unexpected humanity. They arrived as war veterans, but left as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy at its highest point. In their admiration of America's riches, they carried within them the seeds of a vision for the Atlantic Alliance, the Marr Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Germany. They saw America, and they will never be the same again. Their own will grow in a democratic Germany allied with the United States. It was a cooperation built on the foundation of a transformation that began when the veterans of Africa Corps stepped off the train at Mexia, Texas, and realized that everything they believed was wrong. The story of the German soldiers in America ultimately boils down to the journey of salvation through enlightenment. It proves that sometimes the greatest victories do not come from destruction, but from performance, not from propaganda, but from prosperity, not from hatred, but from humanity. The German soldiers who witnessed the industrial might of America became unwelcome ambassadors of democracy, bringing back home. The seeds of transformation would blossom into one of the most successful reconstructions in history. The journey from Nazi fighters to democratic citizens is one of the most significant transformations in modern history. It was accomplished not by force, but by overwhelming evidence of what free people can achieve when they unite. Ultimately, that was America's secret weapon, not simply the ability to produce more tanks and planes than any other nation in history, but the ability to turn enemies into friends through the simple power of the mirror. The German soldiers were stunned by this power. American industry is important, but more importantly, they have been transformed by it, and in that transformation, the foundation for a better world has been laid.